The time is now, right now. This is the hour, this is the new dawn, this is the new day. Now is the time, for nature in all her glory hath named you her king. She has named you the king.
What is the Reich Church? Well, it's exactly what you might think it is. It is the Protestant church, but Nazis, right? And that's very simple. It's a very simple concept to understand, because this is a story of taking the decaying German Protestant church, injecting it with a little bit of the Führer, and turning it into something diabolical. Obviously, this didn't work. That's why we're talking about it today and not living it today, but it's a fascinating story about the crazy shit that the Nazis tried to do to the Christian faith in Germany. And yes, it's rooted in all that psycho-militaristic core and, you know, like Aryan mythology circle jerking. Now, you can't help but summarize this whole theological struggle as one of the most profound crises in modern European history in terms of the church, right? We have a term for everything in German, and it's characterized by the term Kirchenkampf, which basically means church struggle. And the struggle in question was the attempt to harmonize the gospel with the radical nationalistic ideology of Hitler and the Nazi Party. It's kind of like taking a peanut butter and jam sandwich, or jelly sandwich as the French say, and putting shit in the middle. It just ruins the entire thing, right? Of course, this whole process would lead to a German Protestant schism, which is just like, let's have another one, whatever. So I guess you have to sort of rewind a bit and take a look at the Protestant church within Germany. It was pretty much deeply connected with the German state for as long as Germany has been a nation, and they really haven't been a nation for too long. The monarch kind of served, I guess they call it as the Summus Episcopus, or Supreme Bishop, which fundamentally embedded the tradition of the monarchy within the state, you know? They glorified the German monarch kind of like they would the Pope. With the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm, getting rid of that monarch, it threw everything into disarray, completely disrupted the system of the church. And with the creation of the Weimar Republic, everyone's favorite republic, very divisive, that kind of messed things up a bit more, you know? A lot of Germans saw the Weimar Republic as kind of heretical, I guess you could say. And during this time, there was a lot of national resentment, and there just so happened to be a man that said that he had the cure for that national resentment. And it sort of led to a mentality where people in the Weimar Republic looked back at the German monarchy and kind of thought that was the top shit. You know, they kind of thought that was the ideal German church and the ideal German state, and they kind of wanted to go back to that Germany, you know? Thankfully, there was a guy that was promising that to them. The Weimar Republic was seen as a state of national decay, and they would welcome National Socialism with open arms in the replacement of the Weimar Republic. Now, under an ever-growing National Socialist Germany, the largest movement to emerge was the Deutsch Christian, or German Christians. This movement was established in 1932, just before old mate was made Chancellor in 33. They would characterize their support of Hitler not as like a political figure, but as a messianic prophecy being fulfilled. Completely batshit. They are under the interpretation, right, that Hitler had been given a divine mission to save the nation from, Marxism, liberalism, and most importantly, Judaism. And this school of thought, the German Christians would be rebranded into something called positive Christianity. And it suggested sort of like a non-denominational commitment to Christian morals, and instead it would strip those values and replace them with racialist ethics. Sort of like your classic Nazi church things, like portraying Jesus as an Aryan militaristic hero. Not Jewish, right? Jesus was not Jewish in the Reich Church. Big no-no. Removing the Old Testament from the Bible. The Führer as the new source of revelation, very important. And racial purity as a religious obligation. I told you they put that Aryan shit in there. But they argued that the church should not just exist alongside the state, but should actually be intertwined with the state, right? An organ of the state, if you will, serving the interests of the broader racial community. The church became racist. And with that, you sort of had a few more liturgical changes, deeper stuff, right? Such as the removal of all the Jewish or Judaic words from the Bible, like hallelujah. That was completely removed from the Bible. And in place of that, they would put Nazi decor within the church, like a pulpit depicting Jesus preaching to a soldier, and also big fucking statues of SA troopers just dotted around the church. Kind of reminds me of those little green army men from Toy Story. Anyways, seizing power in the year of our Lord 1933, it put the church's Nazi doctrine into overdrive, right? Hitler described the church as the foundation for German values. He ingrained it super deep into German values, right? He also liked to characterize it as a defense against godless communism. The whole point of this at the time was to make one centralized German church. A lot of the old guard of the German Protestant church was kind of kicked out and dismissed, and Hitler actually took part in a lot of church elections from that point onwards. He didn't run or anything, that would be ridiculous, but he definitely promoted a few candidates. He backed this guy called Ludwig Müller in 1933, who he saw as the top guy to sort of usher in this revolution, for lack of a better term. Müller was sort of like a little known military chaplain at the time from East Prussia, who was an adamant member of the Nazi Party since 1931. He just loved them. Müller was elected as Reich Bishop at a national synod on September 27th, 1933, with a little help from his friend. Without a doubt, this guy was instantly Hitler's puppet, forced in by the man himself. Just as quickly as this guy Müller gained his position, he would lose it. 2 months later, in November 1933, a mutual acquaintance, Reinhold Krauss, who was at the time a leader in the church, delivered a speech in front of 20,000 people. He would openly call for the liberation from the Old Testament with its Jewry and punishment mentality. Jewry is such an insane word to say publicly in front of 20,000 people, but look, I'm sure there was a lot of insane shit going on in Nazi Germany. He urged that the church would purge all of its Israelite-isms to create a unified German faith. Now, it's one thing to think these things and to slowly drip them down the pipeline of a Nazi church, but apparently coming out and saying this all at once was a massive deal at the time, and a bunch of people just instantly resigned from the church. Obviously, Hitler was frustrated with Müller for allowing this to happen, most likely because it worked against his vision of a unified Germanic faith and a unified Reich church, and he distanced himself from Müller completely. Müller sort of remained a figurehead of the church, but he lost all his power. He just had no influence within the church, and this would drive him to suicide in 1945, eventually when the Nazis had collapsed. Now this is where we start to get into the crazy weird shit the typical German weird stuff that you hear of. A radical wing of the German Christians sort of moved into the realm of total liturgical purification. A bunch of the little regional churches founded the Institute for the Study and Eradication of Jewish Influence on German church life, and these guys went by the name the Eisenach. Led by Walter Grudman, a professor at the University of Jena, their goal was to de-Judaize the Christian faith and bring it into full conformity with the Nazi ideology. Right, so the project was kind of based on the Aryan Jesus hypothesis. It sort of argued that Jesus wasn't born a Jew, but he was born a Galilean, and his true struggle was a heroic mission against the Jews. Really makes you wonder if they read the book at all, you know? Like once, at least one of them. Kind of makes you think they were just cooking up stuff to be edgy or something. And the primary achievement of the Eisenach was the creation of a revamped Bible entitled The Message of God, right? It was a radically redacted version of the New Testament that sought to replace the Luther Bible, and a couple of the significant changes for this revamped Bible were the removal of the Hebrew Bible, so the Old Testament completely, the genealogy that traced Jesus to David and Abraham was removed to hide Jewish ancestry, and all mentions of fulfilling Jewish prophecy were removed. On top of that, references to Zion, Jerusalem, and the temple were replaced with generic terms, and the term Messiah was changed to the Promised One. So a hymnal, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, was also issued containing Nazified language that emphasized militarism, race, and the blood and soil nationalism. Despite paper shortages at the time, these were printed heavily en masse. They were able to print 200,000 copies of this fucking thing and distributed them to soldiers and congregations. It may seem kind of messed up, but I would love to get my hands on one just to read it. I'm interested. As a student of history, I'm pretty sure I've given my stance on Nazism at least once on this channel already. Watch my other videos to find that. I'm sure I have. It's obviously not good. One of the most significant driving forces behind this whole Reich Church thing was Martin Bormann, Heinrich Himmler, and Alfred Rosenberg. Probably the most fucked up trifecta of people that you can get around that time. These guys pretty much envisioned a future for Germany without Christianity entirely. I guess you could kind of speculate that the slow corruption of the church's liturgy to incorporate Nazi ideology was sort of the first step in a total Christian extinction from Nazi Germany. They wouldn't replace it with secularism, they wouldn't just remove religion and leave it that way, but they would sort of shift Germany's faith into a neo-paganism model. Obviously, if you don't know much about those three guys, they were really into the German mythology. Now, I'm going to talk about the proposed program for this lovely Reich Church, right? It was often cited as a 30-point plan. These are a couple of the changes. So, first and foremost, you've got declaring the Christian faith as a Jewish religion, incompatible with the doctrine of blood and soil. The Bible would be banned, and replaced on all the altars would be Mein Kampf. At the time, it was claimed to be the greatest book of all time. Fun fact, that's how Hitler made his money. He didn't make his money primarily through politics or anything, or speeches. He made his money off publishing Mein Kampf. Everyone had a copy of it, but hardly anyone read the thing. And I don't blame him, it drags on. That book drags on. I haven't read it personally, but I've heard things, Pastors and priests would be replaced with state-sanctioned orators, the crucifix would be replaced with a swastika, and alongside Mein Kampf, a sword would be placed to signify a militaristic new faith. In achieving this, you basically have a cult of the Führer. Progress began as Christian symbols were being removed from courts and schools and stuff. The Gestapo are actually tasked with a lot of this, keeping eye on a lot of the remaining church services to kind of snuff them out a bit, make sure people weren't really joining them. Now, the resistance to all of this stuff came in the form of the Pastors Emergency League. Like, look, a lot of the resistance factions in like movies and TV shows and stuff are kind of fucking boring, but this one's actually kind of cool, and I dare say they're on the right side of history. Formed by a guy called Martin Niemöller, who was a former U-boat commander. Möller was initially a supporter of the Nazis, but he grew kind of disillusioned by the regime's corruption of church doctrine. Particularly the Aryan stuff, or the Aryan paragraph, kind of aimed to exclude any non-Aryan converts to Christianity, which, I mean, kind of removes the whole purpose of it, especially if you go by Acts. Niemöller saw this as heresy, and he's right, it is heresy. The Nazi regime, and now they've switched over. 7,000 out of 18,000. It's a rapid start. They sort of reached their peak at the Synod of Barmen, where 139 delegates from countless Protestant denominations gathered to adopt the Barmen Declaration. Now, if you don't know what the Barmen Declaration is, it's pretty much a declaration that asserts 6 propositions, right? Very important propositions, like Jesus maintains total lordship over the church and rejects all the doctrines of the German Christian Church, or positive Christianity as it's also called, and also that it will not serve any chosen desires, purposes, or plans. Most importantly, they also make the statement that they are the only legitimate Protestant body in Germany at the time, which is extremely bold to be saying in 1934, so props to them for that. Following this, the way legitimate Christians would skirt around these conditions involved like secret meetings and church meetings and sermons. Now, eventually we get the collapse of Nazi Germany in 1945. The German Christians were left to pick up the pieces, more or less, of this shattered institution, because, you know, Nazi Germany fell, so did the Reich Church, right? Now, in the years that followed, enormous amounts of guilt filled the air, more or less asking the question, like, how did this happen? In October 1945, the church issued the Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt, where they admitted to not standing on their beliefs more courageously, but, you know, it's kind of a bit of a piss poor effort. It was criticized for its lack of specifics and insincerity, and was later superseded in 1947 by the Darmstadt, or however you say it, statement issued by many of the Emergency Pastors League members. Pretty much said, what are you doing? What did you do? Why did you facilitate the rise of Nazism? You messed up and you need to answer for it. Like, you messed up big time. You know, they thought they were going to get away with this stuff, but it wasn't actually until 2019 that the Eisenach Institute's crimes were officially recognized. Something about this whole thing just tickles that cartoon villain level plot, you know? Like, the crazy Nazis decide to make a church and a religion. That's why it's so interesting to me. Obviously, you hear a lot about the crazy shit that the Nazis did, like all the weird weapons and stuff that they created, you know, dissecting twins and stuff, feeding potions to Jews and launching them in catapults to see if they could fly. But you don't really hear much about the Reich Church. So anyways, I thought I would share this story with you. Alright, bye.